Welcome, adventurers, to the Recall to Adventure podcast, where we're celebrating 25 years of Islands of Adventure. We'll be sitting down with some of the original show producers, animators, engineers, and designers for Universal Orlando Resort's Second Gate. We're your hosts, Maya
And Holly.
and now, for this episode, we're joined by Christopher Stapleton, show producer for Toon Lagoon. Thank you so much for joining us.
How are you doing?
Good.
Our starting question is usually, how did you get involved in the theme park industry?
I was working in New York City in film, feature film, music videos, Broadway shows, industrials, interactive computer graphics for IBM, doing all sorts of different areas of design. And I was working for one designer who got a call from another designer who was looking for a designer for the Universal Studios Florida original park. And they didn't want the job. And they said, "Hey, did you want a job? There's one opening up. I don't want it. Why don't you go for it?" And I did. And I worked on the original Universal Studios Florida. And then that got me into designing mega theme parks, which actually was just a wonderful career move because it included all the different things I was involved with, from architecture to graphic design to media design to interactive computer graphics to Broadway live shows to, everything, even, virtual reality. So, I was really excited that I could have one project path that I can include all of that in. But mostly, I was able to do what I now call the embodied story, meaning that this is what's unique about theme parks. It's different from stage and screen or interactive computer graphics. The embodied story is involving the audience as a central role, using all senses, all dimensions, all directions, all realities as one world, and provide us the ability to work with what I call experiential media, meaning that the experience drives the media versus the media driving the experience, which was everything else. And so this whole aspect of the embodied story, which I only had ideas and inklings of, more I dive into it, the more I realized, wow, I never could have designed or thought or think of making this choice. And it just fell in my lap, which is great.
That's incredible. I can't believe someone would just be like, "No, I don't want to go work on a theme park. Do you want to do it?"
Oh, well, this person was so headstrong on feature films, and it was like live,
Yeah.
breathe, feature films. And she was doing great in doing that.
Mhm.
And she went to the same school as I did. So once you have your passion and drive, nothing's going to do it. And back then, theme parks were the bastard child of every other form of story. So, I went from Broadway to feature films and Hollywood and everything else that's glamorous and things that you got notoriety for a profession of theme parks where you're pretty much an anonymous designer. And so you just had to do it because, you're intrigued and drawn for a mysterious reason. And I was just leaving New York when they were just tearing down Broadway and Times Square to rebuild it, because that's when it was all the, porn shows and peep shows and everything else. It's all new now. And when I would tell all my friends, Broadway and feature films and music videos and all, I'm going to design theme parks. And they were like, "Really? Are you sure?" And so I left and they rebuilt Broadway and Times Square. And by the time I got back, all of Times Square was essentially a theme park. And I just heard on the radio the other day that all of New York City is essentially a theme park for the rich. So this is permeating through everyone's lives and sense of design. And I went back to give a talk to my alma mater at NYU Tisch School of the Arts and the design for stage and screen. And my talk was all the world's a theme park along the virtuality continuum. And that's where I took my career. And that was a major shift I did right after Islands of Adventure. So my experience at Islands of Adventure was so impactful. It's like saying, we're spending all these billions of bucks and bolts to create this huge experience that is creating memories for a lifetime. Could we apply it to something more than just a few minutes as entertainment? Can we apply it to other parts of human experience? And that's when, after Islands of Adventure, I realized, that was probably that was the best theme park ever in that century. And so we're entering a new century. I was volunteering at UCF in digital media and virtual reality labs. And I said, they asked me, hey, would you like to work at UCF? I said, great. Yeah, I'd love to. Do you have a job? No. Do you have a salary? No. Do you have a budget? No. Do you have equipment? No. Do you have space? No. And so you say, I'm going to take a 100% pay cut to come and work for you and create something. And they said, yeah. And I said, yeah, okay, I'll do that. Within a couple of years, I had a research laboratory in mixed reality that was pulling in about $1 million a year in research funding, applying what the basic things I learned and knew about theme parks, which is everything I knew about every other medium, to things beyond the berm, as you say. And it's amazing. And the fact that I was able to design theme parks at the scale I was able to for those over a decade, that was an entry into all sorts of different places. I went into, operating rooms and urban schools and military training centers and NASA research. And I was saying, oh, yeah, I designed mega theme parks, and like, oh, wow, tell us about it. Come on in. And within a conversation or a meeting, I could be able to parlay my experience into all the things they were doing, because everything had to do with the human experience and the imagination. So that it's an amazing story from Islands of Adventure on, but it was Islands of Adventure was, am I going to get better than this? Why stay in this industry? Well, lo and behold, they did. And they kept on getting better. But I went on the path that was less traveled, and I wouldn't trade it for the world. The reason I did take that path is because I was too impatient. I couldn't get industry to work into research, and I couldn't get academia research into real productions, and I couldn't get the civic area that I could apply it where they had some real problems to solve. And so I realized, I was jumping between sectors to try to innovate faster, quicker, better. But, I learned a lot in the process, but I realized if I just stayed put, I'd be doing what Scott Trowbridge is doing right now. He stuck put. He started to work within the theme park industry, but I delve into research. And so I started working with scientists and psychologists and everything else. But I'm glad I did, because my stories have a lot wider impact, deeper impact, and more diverse impact. But it's amazing where they had gone in parallel.
It's such a different take from what we've heard. I feel like everybody's talked about, yeah, they worked on this, but you've expanded it. You've taken the idea and then you've worked off of it in so many different ways that I don't think I would have thought about. And I think that's really interesting to hear.
Yeah, I just did a post on LinkedIn just to kind of map out a snapshot of my career. And all I could fit in there were the years, the logos, and the titles I had. And that just in all the countries I worked in, that filled it up. And as it was an exercise, because I'm working with a website designer to create a timeline of my experience. Because when I start talking about it, people get lost. And so I figured I need to do an interactive timeline so people can explore on their own at their own pace to really see it and understand what it is or where I've come, because it's amazing.
Yeah, and I find that also kind of interesting because you're talking about trying to create all these different experiences. And it's kind of interesting how, like, the idea of, like, all the world's a theme park, we now also kind of see Universal trying to touch on that idea as well. They just rebranded to Destinations and Experiences not a while back. They've announced they're doing this, like, experimental DreamWorks park in Texas. Like, they're also trying to, like, branch out and, like, redefine again what it means to be a theme park. So that's pretty neat.
Yeah, I mean, this is stuff that I would be talking to senior executives about 20 years ago. And they were like, oh, that sounds cool. Are you going to do it? Well, no, I don't really get it. I don't, So Marshall McLuhan, which was a philosopher of media. Are you familiar with Marshall McLuhan?
Yep, I had to study him in my communications classes.
Right. He saw television and imagined the World Wide Web. Okay. So people saw him as a futurist. One reporter asked him, and he says, Marshall, you are living in the future, the way your vision is, and he coined the phrase, the global village, before the World Wide Web. And they said, what is it like living in the future? And Marshall McLuhan answered quite glibly and says, I'm not living in the future. I'm living in the present. Everyone else is living in the past, which means that the future is all around us. And that's what I see. I see the future and we're not acting upon it. And that's one of the things I wanted to do, which inspired me with Islands of Adventure. Because I was working on projects that would take weeks and months, I was able to work on a project that lasted 5 years and that would last decades after it. And some attractions still there from my original park 30 years ago. So it's like I have some permanence. And at one point in the early 90s, I calculated pretty much over 35 million people seeing my work in flesh and blood annually. And because I had so many attractions going in parallel. And you can't get that on Broadway. You can't get that from Hollywood. You can't get that from a museum. You can really touch people, and not just one person at a time. The thing about theme parks is that it's about a sociality of people enjoying each other in a real space. And that's the embodied story. It's really a social story. And this is a unique thing about Islands of Adventure. The issue is what was unique about Islands of Adventure is that I don't know whether you read about the original Universal Studios Florida. It opened dismally because only half the park opened.
Mhm.
Well, MGM at Disney, their park only opened half a park also. But no one talks about that as the disaster, as they talk about Universal as disaster. You know why? Disney advertised the making of movies. And whatever they opened, they opened. It only took an afternoon to look at everything because it's only half a park, but they didn't get bad press. Universal advertised everything that wasn't working. And so lo and behold, the first day, I mean, it was, okay, so your heart can drop, your everything that you work up to that opening day, and to see the audience so exhaustedly disappointed in saving all their money, these teenagers, to see the first day of Universal Studios Florida and half the things not working and the other things having the lines, it just crushed them. It crushed us. It crushed everybody. And of course, we all who designed the whole thing knew why, but no one was going to reveal that. But the issue is you never want to see that again. Now, footnote, my project opened up on time, before opening, on soft opening, and on budget. So just for the record, my things, well, maybe that's why I was able to work on the next. I don't know. Who knows? I just might be in the right time, right? But working on both of those, there was a huge dramatic change. And that disastrous opening day influenced the entire culture of Universal Studios for a whole decade until the next park opened. And so Islands of Adventure was able to rewrite that culture, that story, that everything about what Universal Creative is today. And that's what it's been growing on as a foundation. But, you had to go through the disasters to realize what you had to do, because Universal was, cheap, fast, and good. You want to do it faster, better, cheaper. And, you just have to know what corners to cut. Now, that is the role of the show producer. And now a lot of people don't understand show producer, and the Total Immersion documentary covered all the show producers. And I'm teaching theme parks now at the Savannah College of Art and Design. And I was talking to another professor who said, "Oh, show producers isn't a creative position." And my eyes bugged out. I said, "It is one of the most important creative positions there is." And they were thinking, "Oh, they don't produce any artistic artifacts, the drawings, the draftings, but they make creative decisions that can make or break any experience in that future." They are all characters, and they all come from all parts of life. They all have a certain perspective, but the one thing that they have in common, they will throw themselves on their sword for the purpose of that audience to just kind of enjoy it to no end. So we are the biggest audience advocate in the entire project, and we risk our entire career and reputation on that.
Yeah, in many ways, like if we are trying to make a comparison across industries, you all are kind of like the director for each individual land. Like you are there to oversee that the vision comes out the way that you want it to.
Yes, if you were in feature films in Broadway, we would be the director. But that has a reputation of being a prima donna. So in theme parks, there are no prima donnas. There are no famous designers or directors. Director had baggage to it. Disney created the position show producer. What the hell is a show producer? No one knows it. And it's only in theme parks, but it's this thing to get around having a director without getting the prima donna and getting someone whose brass tacks, whose personality can move it through. And this is before pre-visualization. Okay. So it was the force of personality that made, and the vision that was able to get that park up and going. With previs right now, it's kind of easy peasy. But when Islands of Adventure finally opened up, I had the whole virtual experience in my head. And when it opened up, it was like, oh my gosh, I can just pull this out and keep it from my memories of my family. I don't have to take that cognitive load of that responsibility to that guest coming in. And so that's probably the best moment is we were all given director's chairs out in front of our, in the middle of our islands when the first guests came in. And we answered questions to the press about the park and the experience. And I was able to talk one-to-one with all of them. And it was just an emotional catharsis and also a whole neural relief. So it was an amazing opening day for very different reasons than most people think opening days are for.
Talking about opening day and looking back, since you were originally with Universal Studios Florida and then got onto the Islands of Adventure project, talk a little bit about like how you came onto it initially and also how the ideas of Cartoon World evolved into what became Toon Lagoon.
Okay, so Toon Lagoon was the least sexiest island. Okay, so, everyone wanted to be a show producer on the other islands. I had all different other motives, but I had a reputation with the Universal Studios, and I've had, tens of attractions for Universal over the years. And I always worked on the attractions that were, I would have to say that I had the most popular second choice attraction of the guests. Okay. Everyone had a different first choice, but I had nailed the second choice favorite attraction. And they were the sleeper attractions. They were things that had a certain kind of appeal, but didn't have that attraction value, but had certain value that left that memory. And so that was really important. Toon Lagoon was that. The target demographics of Toon Lagoon was what they call the shoulder demographics, the very young and the very old. And as you know, probably your first experience was your grandparents taking you to the theme park because they were like, finally, I get some one-to-one time with my grandchild. I can buy the ticket, I can get them there. And it's amazing, different ages experience theme parks very differently. But, I had two kind of thrill rides. And these are thrill rides are not rides that grandparents and grandchildren can ride. And so, what do you do with that? And so this is what's remarkable about the attractions that we did do, which made them unique, which I'm very proud of. But nobody understood a lot of that. So I got kind of the litter pick. That's the last choice. So Scott Drobridge's budget for Spider-Man attraction was more than my entire islands. Okay. So, I get the least budgets, the most work, and the most, and I had over 100 IP properties I had to deal with, with Toon Lagoon, and then Lost Continent had 0 IP. I mean, it was called the Island of Public Domain or Lost Concept, but it was trying to find its way, and it did beautifully, by the way. However, it was a great challenge, and I wasn't able to work with virtual reality. I had millions of gallons of water a minute. I was pulling out from the lagoon, spinning people off the edge of death. And do you realize that water rides are the most dangerous rides in the entire park? No one realizes that because the other ones are locked into the iron rails. You're at the mercy of the water. In about a month before we opened the raft ride at Bluto's, we had a 12-passenger raft ride flip in Texas by another attraction and killed these people, So a lot of attention was on us. We better get this right because when you deal with water, which is the raft and the water, once you put air underwater, that is most ferocious power. It does not want to be underwater. And so it could flip this huge vehicle like that. So what was wonderful is that we were able to kind of get engineers from NASA and Exxon and all from these obscure places to really work with our creative staff. We had amazing production designers that were very talented in opposite extremes from each other. One was extremely experienced, but a curmudgeon. And the other one was new at it all and ready to be raked under the coals by the vendors, but beautifully talented. And my job was to get the results from both of those, not to kind of get everyone upset by one personality, but make sure that the other personality had a strong enough person to support all these wonderful ideas. But then the engineers worked on some well, and we had to build a nice relationship with the engineers to get where we wanted to. So we had a really good relationship between managers, engineers, and creative staff, which was, wonderful. We had our issues, personality-wise, but as far as getting to what we wanted to get done. And so one interesting relationship was with the ride engineer for Ripsaw Falls. That's Ted Van Winkle, by the way. And the engineering department was run as most engineering departments are in universities. It's like the engineer does not take risks. Engineers have lives dependent upon it. Engineers do not trust the art director. And whatever you say, don't do what the art director says. They are your enemy. And so this is the mindset walking with engineers. And at one point, I was talking to him and I'm saying, I threw my arms up. I said, if we did everything you said, this ride would be so darn boring. No one would ride it. And he came back to me and says, yeah, if you did everything you said, they would die. Oh, you got a point. Oh, we got to work together, don't we? Oh, okay. Well, let's work together. But once we got over that, meaning that we needed each other to get something that's never been done before, which is if you're working with Universal and Disney, you have to be that. You do not refried rides. You have to get that original, never been done before. And that means you have to innovate on a schedule and budget. And that is one of the biggest challenging. And the innovation that we did in Toon Lagoon was more than you could imagine, because Scott Trowbridge had an emerging virtual reality technology to work with. We had just the raw force of air, water, and earth to pound these bodies in and around to get an experience that feel at the edge of death, but perfectly safe through the whole thing. So try that. But we did do rides that the original ride engineers and designers and companies, they said, no, you can't do this. You can't do that. You can't do this. And they had all this list. If you turn a thing too tight, it would flip. If you faster you go, the wetter you get. And all these rules that were, none of them are actually based upon engineering science. But we had gotten a vendor that was a subcontractor to one of the vendors, the known vendors who were building these rides for 45 years, never innovating and coming out with boring stuff. We rode every ride out there in the United States that were like ours to say, okay, what's missing? What's needed? How do we go to the next step? And raft rides always looked interesting. Of course, whitewater rafting. Yeah, but they were so boring. And the vehicles were round, but none of them spun. It's like, you have a vehicle that can spin. But they never engineered it. And so we had this brilliant company up in Minnesota that did the due diligence of researching, and they went and did research on the WPA research that government did during the Depression, studying the water eddies from Appalachian rivers to really kind of study this. And what we were able to do was model in the computer water, because you cannot model water in scale. There is only one scale to water. And with that safety and that force. And so we were able to kind of really push every rule in the book and break every rule. Well, not break, rewrite, reimagine every rule. And that was really important. And we had to do it in a cartoon way. So what is that? So one of the things about theme parks is a lot of people don't understand in film and stage and screen is that there is a visceral storytelling. And that's what we do with rides. But there's a competition in storytelling between the visceral, the verbal, the visual, and you really can only be working at one time. So you're orchestrating all of these sensory inputs in all directions and all realities to really kind of craft that final experience. That's what's wonderful to kind of design and orchestrate. And of course, my role as a show producer, being the creative one, my most important magical tool is, pardon the expression, being a good shit detector. I can look at a stack of drawings. I could listen to a meeting. I could see a demo. I could see a piece of a part of a component of a ride and know exactly what that test would need to show and what it would end up looking like and what compromises that would happen if they did. I didn't have the best reputation as far as being easy, getting things passed, but it got all the pieces. I did know how to value engineer in the proper way. Value engineering is how to get the ultimate result, the outcome, with less parts and pieces. And I was able to find and look at some of these pieces that we could probably cut and do without, that the designers were so married to that they couldn't give up. But, you had to really, you were the advocate for the audience. And the thing is, if they had that experience, would they come out of that ride saying, they were missing that one part, But the thing is that they would never know. The audience, you cannot let them see to that detail. You are working with their imagination and you are taking them on an experience that is 7/8 not experienced by their senses. 7/8 of it is their imagination. And painting with the imagination is the other powerful thing about theme parks, is that most people think it's theming, and it's not. And this is what I have to first with my students really understand. Theme parks aren't theming. Theme is the deeper meaning of that park. That, what is it that you walk away with inside in that memory forever? That's the theme, not theming. And also what Ernest Hemingway said in reading a book, that reading a book, the audience imagines 7/8 of that story experience. And that's what I like to do with theme parks. He said, the less I do and the more they imagine, the better the writer I am. And this is what my achievement is. The more you imagine, the more that memory is created through your imagination, the more unique that experience is from the person you're with or from ever. But also, it's different each time you visit it. And that repeatability, that exploration and working with that immersion and detail, every time you come to a park, you have something else to see. And that was what the huge difference between Islands of Adventure and the original Universal theme park was. It had to serve both as a destination park, meaning that this is a once-in-a-lifetime experience, and as a regional park. You would go there every weekend. And so that's why we have more iron rides in Islands of Adventure than in other parks, because it had to service both. And so we had to deal with that immersion, that detail, that around the clock, around the year kind of experience, but also we had to, and this is really major, we had to design for the entire family. And the thing is that we don't go out with different parts of the family going differently. Now, we separate and ebb and flow between that group, but you have to be pleasing the whole family. You can't please every part of the family. And there's always one person in that family who really doesn't want to be there. Now, it might be hard to imagine with you enthusiasts, but we have to design for them, for the shoulder demographics of the very old and very young. I had to design that, and the rides basically exclude them. It's going to be too thrilling for the older people, and the smaller people aren't going to be tall enough. So we built, which is wonderful about Toon Lagoon, it's winding in and out of the facility, in and out of the public area. So you had people from the side as well as people inside, and they're interacting with each other and looking at each other. You never felt that you were excluded from that experience, with part of the family out of the ride and part of your family in the ride. And so that was a truly family experience. And also, we always imagine that in-between experience between attractions. Okay, so what is Granddad doing while he's watching over the toddler and the teens are waiting in line and someone else is shopping? So the issue is Wimpy's is really wonderfully situated where you can have a beer and hamburger while you had the view of the playground, the exit of the park, and the exit of the lagoon, and also the entry. And so strategically, how the family dynamics work is so important as far as sight lines, as far as dynamics, and toddlers have a whole different time of scale of space and time. And so that's why every island had its own playground, because you have to take them into consideration. So that's I had a wonderful time because we learned that in the first park. What happened in the first park, we had a senior executive, Jay Stein, who just was, talk about a force of personality to the extreme. He basically says, we are not a theme park. We are not a theme park. We're a backlot. And so it's like, we opened up and everyone came and everyone was expecting a theme park. He would never admit it, but he soon came around to saying, oh yeah, you can't deny it. It's a theme park. And that's the magic of working with so many different mediums. You can have a film that looks like theater, but it is a film. You can have a theater that looks like a film, but it has to work like a theater. If you're in a theme park, you're working with a theme park. No matter what the story, the theme, or the memory is, its function is as important as its purpose. And theme, which is very interesting, very deeper, that's the memory you're creating that lasts a lifetime.
This idea of immersion and this idea of like, oh, it has to be there for everyone. Like you kind of mentioned, like, okay, so we have the olive, we have like the playground area, and then we also have Toon Walk. John Rust had like an amazing like soundtrack composed for it. It's one of my favorite ones on the album. But like the amount of ways that you were able to integrate so many different characters of Jay Ward there, the way that there's the speech bubbles, the way that there's interactive elements, like how is that designed?
Well, okay, let's take that. And John Rust did an amazing job of the audio, and he went in and hired, award-winning composers and researched in the Library of Congress all these different tunes that he could explore and create music from just a little soundbite. Popeye is da 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 da. I mean, you can't hear that more than once without kind of walking out. And in fact, soundtracks, we can subconsciously get you to exit a building by repeating the soundtrack. So by repeating the soundtrack and not having a long enough composition, we could be doing ourselves a disservice. So John Rust was being able to expand the soundtrack to be able to create a whole CD of soundtracks, and it's wonderfully beautiful. And it really understands these different aspects of sound and music. So music and dance are related, all right? That is also an embodied story, is music and dance. It's intuitive. We all know how to do it. No one has to tell you how to do it. It's spontaneous. Okay. And so when you're going and having an embodied story in the theme park, it is as related to music and dance as possible. And so that soundtrack you can't listen to just on a stereo. You have to be walking through that space. And that's what was unique about Kings Row and looking at and walking through the center of Toon Lagoon that Reed Carson designed, because what happened is that we embodied all these different sounds and music and dialogue and all of it embedded into this facade. Betty Boop's music came from Betty's Boop store. Little Abner's voice came from the Little Abner, graphic. And so all of these things that we could have is what I call ear cons as opposed to icons, is that you could, oh, this, oh, that, and be able to walk through it. And all of this music, even though they're coming out with different sounds at different places, they were all orchestrated within the same beat, the same pattern. And so your dance to the music was not interrupted, but constantly changing kind of character and rhythm and measures. And then when you dived off into the different attractions, you had a deeper dive into that acoustical landscape. And so you have these different layers. You have soundtracks, which are music, which you usually sit down and listen to. In the theme park, you have background music, and that's very unique because the background music isn't supposed to call attention to itself, but ride into you subconsciously. I mentioned that the experience you have to design is all senses, all dimensions, all directions, all realities as one world. And so we see the world with different senses in different ways. So we have a focal perception, which our visual dominates, but we have a peripheral perception that audio dominates. And so that's the back door to your subconscious where the music and dance come along. If you follow somebody going through the park, you need to start to see in their step that musical element. Otherwise, you didn't get that background music right. And with that background music, you have sound effects and you have, ambient music. These are all different forms of acoustical landscape that John Rust was able to explore. And visually, Reed Carlson was able to also exploit and work together. And then we just extended it. But back to the story of melting the boundaries, where does one start and where does one begin? There is no line. There is no line inside the attraction or outside. There is no line between in a store or out of a store. I mean, the only line is when you're out of the islands or in the island. And that is, we give it several yards for you to make that emotional transition. We are working more in your subconscious with the ability with audio. And that's what was happening in Kings Row. And so the visual audio, and once you start synchronizing different senses, that exponentially increases that experience and that memory.
Going back to talking about the water rides themselves, why was it decided to add water rides to the Toon Lagoon area of the park? Also, talking about how they were supposed to be new and immersive, we have a log flume ride that sort of turns into a roller coaster, and we have a raft ride that has all these different crazy water effects, and you never quite know when you're going to get wet when you hop on that ride. Could you dive into the design aspect of both of those?
If I was any other park and I wasn't trying to push the edges and take it farther, I'd just make the drops higher, the thrills bigger, and take the obvious and do it. But there's a lot of different philosophical approaches to that. Well, first of all, we're islands of adventure. What's an island? It's surrounded by water. What island really focused with water? Well, Toon Lagoon, its whole theme was water, and what is water? It's a kid magnet. All right. And this is one way that you can be totally immersed in every sense in being wet that you couldn't do with the safety envelopes of the physical experience. So water is an amazing thing. I mean, that and food are ways to immerse the senses more than any other thing. And so you have the restaurants for the Toon Lagoon, and you had Dagwood sandwich that you could buy and eat if you do so, but the water was great. And so we did not want to limit the water. It came out of everywhere and went everywhere. And on a hot day, that's a favorite place to do. And of course, we had to have water rides in the theme of islands, because the island is in the middle of the water, and we really celebrated water. And we had two rides. One was the wash cycle and one was the spin cycle. So, we got them through. And so, it's as basic as that. But there's some really important things. So we wanted to take these kind of concepts that have existed for decades and reimagine them. So there's two different approaches for each one. Well, first of all, Bluto's was a raft ride, and we went to all the raft rides there were. Do you believe that we were able to travel like 3 different states and 4 different rides in one day with my ride engineer? We would run into the park, do the raft ride, get out, have a change of clothes in the trunk, change it out, run to the next one. And we just had to do yes, we were on a schedule. We had to experience everything. And we realized came back is they're so freaking boring. They look exciting, but they didn't do it. What didn't they do? We had a round raft ride, so we had to design it to spin. Now, why is spinning is important? Well, spinning is fun, but what's most important is related to Vegas. Roulette, it spins, it's round. And so when you get wet, basically people says, well, it's a water ride and we're getting wet. So the more we get wet, the more fun will they have. And I said, no. I mean, that's what everyone else does. And they get it wrong. It's not how wet you get, it's how you get wet. So what we design, and whether it's that way or not, I mean, because they start screwing with it once we open it, but the way it was designed is wherever you thought you're going to get wet, you didn't. Every place you didn't think you got wet, you did. Now, the thing is that you had to have that raft ride spinning, because one of the things that is inherent in water rides is that you're going down and you're seeing a water feature down the river. Mm-hmm. And they're saying, oh my God, I'm on that side that the water feature's on. And you're thinking, I don't want to get wet. I'm going to get wet. I don't want to get wet. I'm going to get wet. I don't want to get wet. And then I get wet. Well, of course, that's not bad enough. Everyone else in the boat is laughing at me, all wet, and I'm miserable. And I'm going to spend the rest of the day squeaking and spinning. Oh, man. I mean, how to destroy one person's experience for the entertainment for everyone else in the boat. That was wrong. It was just downright wrong. Now, imagine that boat spinning. I'm going to get wet. No, I'm not going to get wet. I'm going to get wet. No, I'm not going to get wet. No, you're going to get wet. No, I'm not going to get wet. Oh, and then I get wet. And I don't say, oh, crap, I saw that coming and I did it and boom. But it's like it was a chance. It's how you get wet. I got wet. I didn't know it. It was a roll of the dice. And that's fun. And everyone else was laughing at me. But the next time, the person who was laughing hardest gets wet next, and we could laugh harder to them. And so that whole aspect of a raft ride, getting wet with a vehicle, an around vehicle that doesn't spin, you couldn't figure that out with the 45 years that ride mechanism was in. So we had to invent that. And then we said, okay, well, we're spinning. Why can't we tip and tilt and spin and ride and dive and fast and slow and do everything those other iron rides do? And of course, the knowledgeable people say, "Oh, you can't do that," But we figured out how to do that, and we were the first raft ride ever to be classified as a thrill ride by ThrillRide.com. They were able to get a raft ride, measure on our thing, and so it was truly a wonderful thing. Watch the documentary Total Immersion about the making. You would see some of the prototypes and testing that we did, and the backside of the seats go crashing into the rockwork, and we had to rebuild the whole rockwork. But you got to go there. You got to find out mistakes. And the thing is about water rides that you are not locked in iron. You are at the mercy of the water. And you change one thing in that ride, you change the entire ride. So the amount of testing, and believe me, that would be the winter before opening was when we did the testing. And I, being show producer, had to spend the coldest nights going around and around, getting wetter and wetter in all the rides, making my notes, and memorizing because I couldn't write them down. And oh man, it was torture, but hey, it's what we do, and it pays through. And so one of the things that we had on Popeye's boat on the playground was these little guns that would shoot the boats that go by. And I'm saying, that's not fair. They're sitting ducks. It's the same thing about the spinning boats. We can't have that. It's just not fun being a target and a sitting duck. Who wants to be a sitting duck for their vacation? So what we did in cartoon fashion, we had these little cartoon Popeye water cannons, and we had nozzles that would spin around. And so if you push it, it would go forward the first time. The second time, you never knew where it would spin. It might come back on top of you. You never know. Or hit your sister next to you. So the issue is that level of spinning and chance was in that cartoon fashion a lot of the fun. It's how you get wet, not getting wet. And you really have to understand the balance. You have to be entertaining for everyone. So if someone's not laughing at your joke, it's not appropriate joke. Okay. So same with getting wet, same with laughing in a social group, in a family aspect. You have to do that. And so that raft ride, every inch of that ride you see. So every dollar we spent for every square inch got its value because it spun and turned on itself. You had, in and out of the ride, you had landscaping that you see from all different areas. You had Q walking in and out of landscaping and the outside and the ride. So you saw it from all angles everywhere. And that was most dense, consolidated value per square inch than any of the rides. It was wonderful figuring all that design out. And we had beautiful designers who had defined what a cartoon rock is, because every cartoon rock is different. It depends on the artist. And so believe me, how, going over years of really educating people of what is Bluto rock, and of course every rock had a different style based upon what character space you were in. And so, Jay Ward rocks are very different than Popeye rocks. So that was a challenge. But then we got to Ripsaw Falls, where we had that conversation with that engineer that we had to kind of build a truce together to understand we both needed to kind of push the edges, but keep everyone safe. Once you let an engineer's imagination released, there is no stopping. There is no putting the toothpaste back in the tube. They start being very creative, which is wonderful. It frees the engineers, and that collaboration is great. But this combination between a coaster and a flume ride is what we call this aqua coaster. And so we went higher than Splash Mountain. So Splash Mountain was the ride to beat, and we did. And so the thing is that, okay, well, you go through all these little kind of, Splash Mountain is like a lot of dark rides. And you're going through all these like window displays. Oh, here's this scene and here's that scene. And I see that as so totally anticlimactic. And then you have the thrill. You need to work with that visceral storytelling throughout the whole ride. And then when you get to something visual, you calm down the visceral. But if you have something verbal, that a line of saying, "I'll get you, Snidely, and I'll save you now," you had to be able to kind of orchestrated and work the balance, just like John Russ did with the soundtrack. You had to do with all those forms of storytelling to get everything as a one experience. And so when you're going through Ripsaw Falls, what you see is a big attraction. You see this big, huge fall like Splash Mountain, and you're always anticipating that. So throughout the whole ride, we have all these false, expectations of, oh, here it is, and do give them something else. So it's you go in the dark, you fall, but you come back out, or you go, so these twists and turns, so you really don't know where you are at any one time, and you're going in and out of the building. In the Florida codes, the ride is inspected by the Department of Agriculture. The building's inspected by the Department of Buildings. So you have two completely different structures that have to build to give one attraction. That's a whole nother story, but it was something that we had to really make sure our ship detectors, right, when architecture's drawings come in and slice and dice this whole thing into drawings to really see, do you have that 10-minute experience going to be what it is? Because it's been split up and all the bolts and buttons and everything separated. And so that was a really important thing. But so what happened is that we did all these, what we call head fakes. We think that we're going to do what we're not. And so that kept it going. And it worked it inside the characters. And so you were going through one thing and you were a log going through the sawmill with Nell, and then you go one way, she goes the other way. So we were working all those moments out. And then when you finally did come out of the big drop, you don't realize that big drop until you do the drop, because you fall through the floor of the top building. And of course, that fall is a head fake, because you fall down and you don't fall at the shack, you fall under the water and then back out as if it spit you out on the other side. So you had a kind of a double visceral feel to that. And so that was all these things that is a part of the storytelling that was working this cartoon language of, what do you do? What are the expectations? What are not the expectations? How do you work with them and against them? And in the smallest moments, in the broadest kind of gesture, and have each of those moments timed and triggered in the right way. And so Ripsaw Falls, I have to say, I'm very proud of my whole team, particularly Steve Ludwig, who was a production designer for Ripsaw Falls. God rest his soul. That Ripsaw Falls was the best in the world attraction in its class for longer than Spider-Man. So we beat Spider-Man in one way, even though that was everyone's favorite. But for 13 years in a row, that was the best water ride in the world. So that won the Magic Golden Ticket Awards and so forth. I'm surprised Bluto's didn't get that. But, that is, again, one of those sleepers that I like Bluto's better, because there was so much design and so many layers and so many different areas that we did to innovate each one of those. And you should see some of the prototypes we had for all the different rides, for the fall in Bluto's, for the drop in Ripsaw Falls. The drop in Ripsaw Falls we had up in Freiburg, Germany, right off the edge of the Black Forest, and we had it all mocked up. And it was amazing what we had to do to kind of mock it up and get the right feel and get the right areas. And for the drop and what we did, and sometimes right in the backyard of Imagineering, we had some hidden, prototype kind of thing that we kludged pickup trucks together with big raft, rides and vats of water that we had to do in the open air, but we couldn't let Disney see it and rush people down. It just, what we had to do to make sure that guest experience was what it was needed to be.
Bluto's is my favorite of the two, for sure. I heard someone the other day describe it as the Russian roulette of theme park attractions, and it's not far off.
And that's the way it was designed, and why they didn't think of it 45 years before, I don't know. They probably didn't have computer software to prototype and to model water in a computer model.
Yeah.
So we've talked a lot about the rides and the theming. However, one thing that true Islands of Adventure fans will know was the short-lived show, Pandemonium Cartoon Circus. Could you talk about that?
Well, my background's Broadway theater. So, when you talk about theater, I love it. And also music videos, when music videos were just becoming a thing. That's what I was doing in New York City when I first got there. So right out of high school, it was just a great time in New York. And so I love it. And working with the architect, it's like designing that theater. They were just kind of turning it into some kind of amphitheater. I said, no, we got to put on real shows here. We got to have a fly gallery. We have to have this. We have to have that. And shows come and go. They have a throughput of shows that you need. So we really put in a lot of work, but we didn't get everything we wanted in the theater structure itself. But, a lot of the live shows and theme parks are usually left to the last minute. So it wasn't designed from the beginning like everything else. I wish it was. And I wanted to kind of get in there and really do I mean, imagine what you can do, because with live characters, that's where theme parks come alive. I mean, figuratively and literally. The issue is that what you can do with human performance is amazing, and puppetry, and just, it just had such opportunity. It was left to the last minute and ended up not having the time and gesture and importance. But then it was a venue that was so important to, TV shows coming in there and shooting as a backlot. And so that it became very valuable as an event venue, as a television show. I think, a couple talk shows used it as a backdrop when, they had different Fear Factor kind of shows in there. So it had a lot of competition in the designing of it and the ending of it. So I don't have much to say about the show outside of, I wish we could have started from the beginning and did a real show.
Yeah.
Did you see the original show?
I've seen it on YouTube. It is actually available in full on YouTube. So that is good.
So I did do Rocky and Bullwinkle in the other park, Universal Studios Florida, and we were able to use Rocky and Bullwinkle and the villains in that show, and we had a lot of fun. And I worked with a director called Michael LaFleur, who was just brilliant at bringing the walkabout characters to life and really get a comedic show out of those characters. It is an art form. The problem is, and a lot of times people, when they direct those types of shows, they do what they call the rubber bounce. I worked on Sanrio in Tokyo with all the Sanrio characters, and you do videos of that, and they're just kind of bouncing around and doing this shtick over and over and over again. And the thing is that how do you get a performance out of that rubber suit, which is not designed for normal human beings? This director was able to do it. He also directed the Sinbad show. I wish I could have had him and added. We did the Beetlejuice show on the other park also, because we could have made a Broadway level show out of cartoons. And wouldn't that be so cool? Way before Spider-Man hit Broadway.
And we all went where that went.
Exactly. We've talked about the Pandemonium Cartoon Circus and how you wish that could have been something bigger than it ended up being. But is there anything else, any other aspects about the park, looking back on it, that you wish you could change?
Oh, well, all the things we cut, we should have had in.
Well, obviously, yeah.
But did you ever see them? No, So the whole raft ride was built on a 15-foot drop in that raft ride. So we had designed and patented a whole raft ride drop, which was a raft ride came across that area. And at the last moment, you saw the waterfall. And basically, we dropped it and it came out so that it was like going over the waterfall, which you don't do on a raft ride. You don't, but you think you do. And we had it tested, engineered, built, delivered. The only thing we saw that we were trying to save money at the last minute, and the Grand Poobahs decided to say, hey, we can save money not installing this thing. Let's not install it. No!
Damn Spider-Man.
So it's scrap metal right now. And man, and they just let, you go up to the top of the lift and you fall down. But the thing is that what was interesting is that when they didn't do it, we had this whole other waterfall. It was actually a waterfall that twisted and turned. And it was really weird and scary. And it was weird and scary because it wasn't designed that way. It happens to be a raft ride drop without the drop. So what happens? You just drop. It's like and spin and turn. And I don't know what was scarier, the thing that we designed and patented or the thing that we ended up kind of ripping off. But it took a lot of testing because we're working on steel and concrete and millions of gallons per minute of water pouring through it. And so we tested it. We explored it. We get the jackhammers out and resculpt that rock if we had to, but it got going.
So much water that you also had to pull it from the show lagoon, right?
That was a big delay in building it. So the thing is that with water rides, you have to think about the emergency as much as the ride. It's like when you have all this water running, if you have to stop the show, where does the water go? So we can always build a reservoir out in the middle and accept the water and draw the water and have that potable water, or we could pull it from the lagoon. And so that was a decision that couldn't be made so far late in the deal that it really delayed a lot of things that we had to catch up for. So they finally decided on the Lagoon order. And the Lagoon, that meant that we couldn't have fireworks in the Lagoon show. So that limited, but it wasn't that big of a lagoon because basically, I mean, Epcot's Lagoon itself covers half of Islands of Adventure. So that is such an extravagant use of square footage, Epcot, that that becomes a real deterrent for people who are handicapped. Distance is as challenging as height. And so the efficiency of the entire park of Islands of Adventure is so much better oriented for those family members that are in a wheelchair or on crutches or a cane or that aren't as mobile. And so that was really nice. So we were able to finally decide it, but then that left the space that we had for the reservoir prepared for expansion area. So that was kind of nice. So the land's still there. So we have to keep the lagoon water much cleaner than most lagoon water is. Yeah, the lagoon lowers several inches once we start up the rides.
What is your favorite island that isn't Toon Lagoon, and why?
I always really loved Lost Continent, or as we called it in building it, Lost Concept, or the land of public domain, because we weren't beholden to any kind of previous expectations of some brand. And we could take all these myths and legends and reimagine them with all the different latest technologies and experiences. And so, us show producers who were involved in collaboration, we were just loving watching each other's creative process going on, both in the design and building of it. So we were very much involved in that evolving. And so I really loved how that park evolved. And I loved the restaurants and the attractions and the details and the walkarounds and the space and the immersion and the different music. So I thought it was just beautifully nuanced and immersed. And then it allowed for the transition of that park across the life of the park so that it brought in and rethemed some of these attractions to be other attractions, which was wonderful. And so then it was a perfect kind of match to kind of weave in Harry Potter with that type of stuff. Now, even though that was an IP, it was an IP that was driven by a very particular art department and author, which was great. And so it valued that nuance and detail as much. And of course, the whole Poseidon's Fury was a concept that was actually originally designed to go in one direction, but ended up going in the other direction because it made a better story. So it was wonderful how they were kind of playing around with how that was working around and being done. And so it was fun watching all of those experiments happen. First the prototypes for each component, then all the testing for each component, then all the integration of those components. And then when they all start getting together with a show control and the rock work and the scenery and everything else, it was just so amazingly magical. It was such a joy going into these other islands. But, the whole Lost Continent was being from the theater and film industry. I love that detail and nuance and what they call environmental storytelling. And that is the beauty of that. And a lot of theme parks, they're just theming, and it's just an excuse to get from one attraction to the other. But in Islands of Adventure, we made sure that every inch was an experience, was part of the story. And it was a story that the audience became the director. The audience became the cinematographer. The audience became participating in the authorship to create their own unique experience through that. Once we got you involved, we never let you go. And it's that, soundtrack that was throughout the whole thing that even going from island to island, it was able to transition into the different beat, into a different sense. And that is building your story world in your imagination, or what I call the phenomenology of the augmented imagination that we do with environmental storytelling that creates an experience that most of it you didn't actually experience. It's all in your imagination. And we know as humans, story is the fabric of our reality. So you can talk about virtual reality, physical reality, imaginality, sociality, but it's the story that is the fabric of our true reality. And that is what we have a lot of fun with. It's your story. It's their story. It's a story, a group story. And most important is what I call the conversational story creation that we do as a group. We go as a family or a set of peers. We have to understand what that audience is doing because they are responsible for the majority of that story. And it's less about what you see or what you feel or what you hear. It's more about how we are painted with your imagination. And yeah, it's about illusion, about manipulation. We do all that. We all have false memories. And yeah, we work more social psychophysiologically than we do with cardboard and paper mache. Phenomenology is a philosophy that was existed for hundreds of years. It is essentially the essence of experience. And the essence of experience is that we don't experience physical reality. We experience sensory input that we build a mental model in our head. So when we're going through Spider-Man and we see stereoscopic vision, we're not seeing 3D. We see stereo 2D, that we build a mental model of something 3D. So you seeing 3D is all your imagination. So the phenomenology, the essence of experience, is the fact that it's all in your head. It's how we stimulate that model that's in your head. Augmented imagination is what that conversation is between the computational kind of procedure and the human reasoning. That is that conversation that creates something more than the sum of the parts, which builds that actual experience that's all in your head. So the phenomenology of the augmented imagination is amplified by the social psychophysiological stimulus that we get. The social, you as a family, the psychological, the story that we paint with your imagination, and the physiological, the visceral storytelling. At all levels, we can tell the simplest story in the most detailed, layered, intuitive way and experience over and over again and have a new experience.
Incredible. Absolutely.
You didn't know we were screwing with your head that much, did you?
No, not on such a big level. I don't usually think that deep, but it's incredible to hear about it.
Well, so that's why after Islands of Adventure, it was like the best theme park ever, the best in the century. It was the end of the century. But it's like, what do you do there? More of the same? In fact, when they put us out in the park and we met guests for the first time, and they're like, oh, wow, this is great. You show producer, that's fantastic. And I said, yeah. And I would ask each one, I said, well, if you liked it so much, what do you want next? And they're saying, more of the same, bigger, better. And they don't know what they want. And so that's our role as creative designers and producers, is to be able to understand what you want more than you know what you want. What's that? Well, that's the whole creative problem solving. We don't know the answer, and we don't know the answer till we discover it and test it and find it. And that is one of the most important things and challenge to those who want to be theme park designers, is that it's a hell of a lot more than what you think it is. It's not just thinking. It is working at so many different levels and working with so many different disciplines, with so many different, and so I was working not like with Scott Trowbridge, where you had the virtuality. We had to deal with Newton's laws of physics, but still innovate. And so, those are unforgiving, but you still can innovate no matter where you go. And that's so after that, after doing Islands of Adventure, I was just so thrilled to work with so many disciplines and so many different trades and so many different kind of areas, that I said, I want to start a laboratory to study the human experience, take all the skills I've learned on Broadway and feature films and music videos and mega theme parks, and how can I apply it to therapy, to training soldiers, students, surgeons. And that's all that I've been doing after that. And that's where I started the laboratory at the University of Central Florida, called the Media Convergence Laboratory. Some of those laboratories still exist, but they've spawned into other laboratories. That was kind of the prototype for the Florida Interactive Entertainment Academy that grew into, now they have an experience design department that I wanted them to do 20 years prior, but they didn't get it. They said, what, do a degree for theme parks? I mean, Orlando is the experience capital of the world. They weren't really understanding. But then I started working with them and developing the Text and Technology program and the Simulation and Training doctorate program at IST. So it really spawned all new levels of educational programs at UCF, which I loved. And what I then did from that is went on to be a social entrepreneur, to really kind of start applying these things to what I think is the future.
What if you're an aspiring theme park engineer, worker, whatever, what do you say to help push them along?
Okay, most themed experience programs, and there are a lot of them going. I'm working at SCAD, which was the first originated experience design program. And that's why I went there. As I said, I'm going to go to the original because they are moving the themed entertainment program into the School of Creative Technology, which is new. So that took my pioneering of mixed reality with my experience in mega theme parks together. So I want to be there. I want to help develop and merge that program. But there is so much to learn to be a theme park designer. They don't really understand. And now you have a lot of people who worked up from the ranks of being a turnstile operator to being a director of a theme park. And that is not the path you take. I mean, you say, oh, I don't have to do it. He didn't do it. The issue is, yes, you do have to do it. If you're going to do something original and go beyond, you have to understand all the science, technology, the arts, humanities, the media, everything. And you have to merge it and melt the boundaries. And there's just far too much to learn in any one program. Our program's only 2 years. It should be 4, 5, 6, 7 years to really do it justice. And so you really have to make a choice of what path you're taking and get an undergraduate degree in something totally different so you can apply it. So if it's from an engineering undergraduate and you go to a master's of fine arts for themed entertainment, get something else under your belt because, even with the undergraduates I teach, they're just coming out of a K-12 thing and they don't really quite understand creative problem solving because in creative problem solving, you do not know whether there's an answer. Frustration and ambiguity are the tools of teaching and creativity. And if you're coming through a, memorization, teaching the test, educational institution, you can't be jumped into creative problem solving. You need that undergraduate to kind of learn what everyone else knows, get a master's of fine arts, and to do what is what I call embodied storytelling. And you have to know how to not only do it, but then tell all these other disciplines and all these other vendors around the world how to build it, how to design it, how to put it back together, and how to make sure that you are the advocate of the guest, that you are creating not bits and bytes and bolts. You're designing with the imagination. And so you might want to ask, are you mixing all these realities and all these worlds? What's next? What's the future? And what I say is small is the new big. But as the world becomes a theme park, every moment, every corner, every experience, every community has to understand their experience is that level of design. And what we're doing is not theming. It really is themed, meaning deeper meaning of experience design, being an experience architect, designing complex systems of systems to influence human behavior for diverse stakeholders. That's a huge design thinking problem. I'm hoping to kind of help create a program somewhere in the world that can address that level, that we can do what we do in theme parks and be able to reimagine the entire world to make it a better society. And it's going to happen because the smallest moments make the biggest memories. What Toon Lagoon taught me, because we had the biggest objective with the smallest budget, was limitation is the root of creativity. So between those two, you can be amazing how much you can do with just a small moment and a little bit of budget.
Incredible.
Awesome. Yeah, this is taking me back to my anthropology degree.
Hey, that's a great undergraduate degree to start with to get master's. But anthropology is storytelling, right? And you have to extract it. And you don't necessarily know the answer, but you might know some answers and not others.
If there was one thing that you could say to all the people that have experienced your theme park attractions over the years, what would it be?
Well, I don't say anything. I ask it. I want to know what they remember. I mean, that's what I was doing it for. I was doing it to make memories for last forever. And so when they come up and I said, what do you remember? What did you like the most? I want to know from them what they've taken from it. And one of the amazing things, okay, this has to do with interaction at the original park. I did Alfred Hitchcock, The Art of Making Movies. And that was the legitimizer of Universal Studios Florida. I did the attractions where you can actually learn about filmmaking. The others rides were ride the movies. And so the image I had in designing that is I imagined a 14-year-old or an 8-year-old coming to the Hitchcock Pavilion and being immersed into film and doing all these special effects with film. I want to inspire them to be a filmmaker. Now, I would never know whether they would become a filmmaker, but that was the guiding force. I want to inspire them to have a career aspiration to making films like Hitchcock. But I had a lucky moment because 10 years later, I joined the staff of UCF with a combination of digital media and film. I was in charge of the acceptance committee of students coming in. I would read all their essays and I would amazing how many essays read. I first wanted to be a filmmaker when I went to the Hitchcock Pavilion. And lo and behold, I was able to have a piece of data 10 years after the fact that they experienced as a kid, that now they're going and applying for film school to be that filmmaker I wanted to inspire them to be. And to this day, the best compliments I've had being a teacher is usually 10 years after the fact.
I mean, I definitely imagine that must feel pretty humbling. Like, just hearing all the people that have reacted and been inspired by the stuff that you've done.
Yeah. You know, my most frustrating thing about Islands of Adventure is that when I first got the job, I said, this is going to be perfect for my daughter who was just growing up. She'd love it. It was just in time. It was just like, but she was slightly a couple years too young to understand it. I took her back to the construction site and she was scared. She wanted to get off. You know, I was in the car. She was safe. Yeah. But, you know, when it first opened, it was like, you know, she didn't really understand theme parks at such a young age. And it was like, it's what daddy does, you know, and daddy does business. That's boring. Most of her through her life, she wasn't really getting what I did for a living until her friends started going to theme parks. And then it was like, oh, well, your dad designed the theme park? But it was just after the fact. It wasn't in the moment. So that was the biggest disappointment, was my child was a couple years younger to really enjoy a theme park.
But still, I mean, at least she got to experience it eventually. Like, once she learned a little bit more, she was able to, like, be there with her friends and have that kind of lived experience.
Well, so I get it from my students now who go to parks and experience it. And that gives me a little magical quality that they've been able to experience. And we're able to talk about their experience, and to see their wonder and excitement really excites me. It never gets old.
Thank you so much for joining us. This has been an amazing interview. It's been great having you integrate like theory into the discussion as well.
It's not theory, it's heuristics. And as I tell my students, people dismiss theory. These are his heuristics. This is how we design parks now, here, with physical reality. Heuristics is the emergence of artistic convention, if it's around long enough. But we always are reinventing theme parks. So that's important.
Makes sense. Thank you so much. Definitely appreciate it.
Thank you. I'm so glad you enjoy it. And you're going after and collecting these stories and bringing it together.
And that brings us to the end of this episode. For our next adventure, we'll be joined by Phil Bloom. See you there.